Eric's story begins with the most mundane of days, its normalcy betraying no hint of the storm that was about to descend on his life. Married for 6 years to Jennifer, he thought he had everything he needed: a loving wife, a stable home inherited from his grandmother, and a community he trusted. It was one of those cool mornings that held promise, the kind that whispered of life's simple pleasures. Eric's plan for the day was simple: work out, hit the office, and finish early to enjoy a relaxed evening with Jennifer. As fate would have it, his workout was cut short by an awkward fall during a game of basketball with his coworkers. His arm throbbed from the awkward landing, a minor injury, but enough to sideline him for the day. Frustrated, but trying to see the bright side, Eric decided to stop by home for a quick snack before heading to work. After all, the house was close by, and he now had the unexpected luxury of time. As he approached the house, something struck him as odd. Parker, their affable but overly present neighbor, was parked out front. It wasn't unusual for Parker to drop by. Eric often relied on him for small fixes around the house. But today, there were no broken fences, no leaky faucets, no reason for Parker to be here. Shrugging off the oddity, Eric stepped inside. The air in the house felt off, too still, too quiet. He called out, "Jen, you home?" expecting her cheerful voice to echo back from the kitchen or the living room. Instead, there was only a muffled sound, movement upstairs. His steps toward the staircase were slow, deliberate. Something in his gut told him to be cautious, though he couldn't explain why. And then he heard it. Laughter. Low, intimate, and unmistakably Jennifer's. It was accompanied by a man's voice, a tone he recognized instantly. Parker, his neighbor, his so-called friend. Eric froze mid-step, his heart pounding so loud it felt as if it echoed in the empty hallway. He wanted to dismiss it, rationalize it. Maybe they were just chatting, maybe Parker had stopped by to check on something. But the hushed tones, the kind of laughter that had once been reserved for him, they told a different story. Forcing his legs to move, Eric climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the bedroom door, it was slightly ajar. Through the narrow crack, he saw them. Jennifer's head thrown back in laughter, Parker leaning close to her, their knees almost touching on the edge of the bed. They weren't just chatting. Jennifer looked up then, her smile faltering when she saw him standing there. "Eric," she exclaimed, her voice sharp with surprise, guilt flashing across her face. Parker stood abruptly, stammering, "Hey, Eric, it's not what it looks like." But Eric didn't hear the rest. His vision blurred, his fists clenched. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as he struggled to process the betrayal unfolding before his eyes. "Not what it looks like?" Eric's voice was eerily calm, though his body trembled with barely restrained anger. "Jennifer, care to explain why Parker's in my bedroom? On our bed?" Jennifer scrambled to her feet, her hands wringing nervously. "Eric, he was just helping with some things. The house." "What things, Jennifer?" Eric interrupted, his voice rising. "I've been home for 5 minutes, and I can already see there's nothing broken but my trust." The tension was suffocating. Parker mumbled something about leaving, awkwardly sidestepping toward the door. "I should go," he said, and Eric didn't stop him. His focus was on Jennifer now, who stood rooted to the spot, tears welling in her eyes. "Eric, please," she began, reaching for him. "Let me explain." But he couldn't hear her over the roaring in his ears. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, out of the house. Later, when his hands had stopped shaking, Eric knew he needed clarity, not just emotional outbursts. He needed the truth. The messages he found on Jennifer's phone, the ones she hadn't thought to delete, told him everything he needed to know. Explicit texts, pictures, plans. Parker wasn't just the man next door. He was the man she'd chosen to betray him with. But Eric didn't confront her right away. He wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, he began to plan. And what better stage than her upcoming birthday, where family, friends, and Parker's own wife would gather to celebrate Jennifer's 32nd year. Eric would give her a gift she'd never forget. The days leading up to Jennifer's birthday were a haze for Eric, filled with late nights and restless mornings. Every time he looked at her, he saw the betrayal, heard her laughter with Parker echoing in his mind. Yet, outwardly, he remained composed, even kind. He went to work, came home, and even helped her finalize plans for the party. To Jennifer, it must have seemed like he was oblivious to what was really going on. She even thanked him, her voice laced with guilt. "You're being so sweet about this," she said one evening as they prepared the guest list. "I know I've been distracted lately." Distracted. Eric almost laughed at the word. What a gentle way to describe sneaking around with the neighbor. But he swallowed the bile rising in his throat and smiled instead. "Don't worry about it. I want your birthday to be perfect." He meant it, just not in the way she thought. Behind the scenes, Eric was meticulously preparing. He printed out the incriminating texts complete with timestamps and photos. He compiled the images into a neat folder, just enough to prove his point without going overboard. He didn't need to embellish. The evidence spoke for itself. Jennifer and Parker had dug their graves. All he had to do was hand them the shovel. The night before the party, Eric sat in the kitchen long after Jennifer had gone to bed. He stared at the folder on the table, a storm of emotions raging inside him. Rage, hurt, disgust, and beneath it all, a strange, quiet sorrow. He still loved her. Even now, even after everything, a part of him wanted her to be the woman he had married 6 years ago. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. "I'll get through this," he muttered to himself. One way or another. The morning of the party dawned bright and clear, mocking him with its perfection. Eric moved through the motions, setting up decorations and arranging the catered food. Jennifer fluttered around, her laughter ringing through the house as she spoke with friends on the phone, finalizing last-minute details. She seemed lighter, freer, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath her roof. By the time the guests began to arrive, the house was a lively blur of chatter and music. Jennifer was in her element, greeting everyone with her dazzling smile. Eric played the role of the devoted husband perfectly, shaking hands and making small talk with relatives and neighbors. Even Parker showed up with his wife, Lisa, who clung to his arm, blissfully unaware of her husband's indiscretions. "Hey, Eric," Parker said, his grin just a little too wide. "Thanks for inviting us." Eric resisted the urge to punch him in the face. Instead, he returned the smile. "Of course. Wouldn't miss having you here." As the evening wore on, Eric waited for the perfect moment. He wanted everyone there, their families, their friends, Parker's wife. He wanted the world to see Jennifer and Parker for who they truly were. When the cake was brought out, Eric's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. "Everyone," he called, clinking a glass to get their attention. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. "Before we cut the cake, I just want to say a few words about Jennifer." Jennifer beamed at him, her cheeks flushed with happiness. She probably thought he was about to give a heartfelt speech about their life together. The thought made his stomach churn. "Jennifer," he began, his voice steady, "you've been my wife for 6 years. My partner, my confidant, my best friend. I thought I knew everything about you." He paused, letting the words sink in. Jennifer's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her face. "But it turns out," Eric continued, "there are things about you I didn't know, like how you've been spending your time with Parker." He turned his gaze to Parker, whose face drained of color. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Jennifer's eyes widened in panic. "Eric, what are you talking about?" Eric reached into his pocket and pulled out the folder. "I'm talking about this." He held it up for everyone to see before tossing it onto the coffee table. Pages spilled out, revealing texts and photos that left no room for doubt. Lisa, Parker's wife, stepped forward, her face contorted with confusion. She grabbed one of the papers and froze as she read it. "Parker," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" I can explain," Parker stammered, but Eric cut him off. "Don't bother," Eric snapped. "The evidence speaks for itself." The room was in chaos now, guests murmuring and exchanging shocked glances. Jennifer's parents looked mortified, while Parker's wife began to cry, her hands trembling as she clutched the damning photos. Jennifer tried to reach for Eric, her voice desperate. "Eric, please, let's talk about this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," Eric said coldly. "My lawyers have already drawn up the divorce papers. You'll be receiving nothing, Jennifer. Not the house, not the savings. You can explain to everyone here why that's fair. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, Eric thought she might collapse. But he didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. This party's over, he announced. Thanks for coming, everyone. As the guests filed out in stunned silence, Eric stood by the door, his face a mask of calm as his world crumbled around him. The house was eerily quiet after the last of the guests left, their whispers and shocked murmurs still lingering like ghosts. Jennifer sat on the living room couch, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held one of the damning photos Eric had flung onto the coffee table. Her parents had been the last to leave, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and disappointment, and Parker had hurried Lisa out the door amidst a flurry of quiet sobs. Eric stood by the window, watching the last of the cars disappear down the street. The rage that had carried him through the evening was beginning to fade, replaced by an emptiness he wasn't prepared for. He had exposed her, taken his revenge, and delivered the justice he thought she deserved. So, why didn't it feel like a victory? Jennifer broke the silence first, her voice small and trembling. Eric, please. We need to talk. He didn't turn to face her. Talk about what, Jennifer? You've said enough with your actions. I'm sorry, she whispered. I made a mistake. It was stupid. I was stupid. Eric let out a hollow laugh, finally turning to face her. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to buy milk at the store. This was a betrayal. You don't accidentally end up in bed with a neighbor. Jennifer flinched at his words, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. I swear it wasn't serious. It wasn't serious? Eric shot back, his voice rising. You're sitting there telling me it wasn't serious while there are photos, Jennifer, of you with him, texting him, sneaking around like a couple of teenagers. How long? How long has this been going on? She hesitated, wiping her face with trembling hands. A few months, he repeated, his voice thick with bitterness. You mean to tell me you've been lying to me, sleeping next to me every night, for months while you carried on with Parker? The guy who borrowed my tools last week. I didn't mean for it to happen, she cried. It just happened. We were spending time together because of the house, and one thing led to another. Stop, Eric interrupted, holding up his hand. Don't insult me with excuses. Don't you dare try to justify this. Jennifer buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing through the empty room. Eric watched her, his chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. He had loved this woman, trusted her, built the life with her. And now, that life felt like a lie. What did you think was going to happen, Jennifer? He asked, his voice quieter now, but no less sharp. Did you think I'd never find out? That Parker's wife wouldn't figure it out? Or did you just not care? I care, she said, her voice muffled by her hands. I care about you. I love you. Eric's laugh was cold and bitter. Love? Is that what you call this? You don't do this to someone you love. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face desperate. I do love you, Eric. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I felt like we were drifting apart. Don't, he snapped, his voice like a whip. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I've been working my ass off to give us a good life. And you repay me by sneaking around with the guy next door? Jennifer dissolved into sobs again, but Eric felt no sympathy. Not now. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair as he struggled to keep himself together. I can't do this, he said finally, his voice breaking. I can't look at you. Not tonight. Where are you going? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. Somewhere you're not, he replied coldly. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. And with that, he grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving Jennifer alone in the wreckage of their marriage. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Eric. He got into his truck and drove, not knowing where he was going, just needing to put distance between himself and the house that no longer felt like home. He ended up at a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and threadbare carpets. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Eric checked in, dropped his keys on the bedside table, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time that night, he let the tears come. Eric woke to the pale light of dawn streaming through the thin motel curtains. His head ached, not from alcohol, but from the sheer emotional toll of the night before. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face as the events replayed in his mind. The party, the confrontation, Jennifer's tears. He felt no relief, no satisfaction. Only a deep, gnawing emptiness. He checked his phone. A dozen missed calls and twice as many texts from Jennifer. Some were apologies, some desperate pleas, others angry accusations. He didn't open any of them. Instead, he set the phone down and stared at the cracked ceiling, wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. By mid-morning, hunger drove him out of the room. He found a diner nearby, its neon open sign buzzing faintly. He ordered coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs, though he barely touched the food. His thoughts churned, alternating between anger and heartbreak. How could Jennifer betray him like that? What had gone so wrong? A text buzzed on his phone. Against his better judgment, he checked it. Jennifer, please, Eric, just talk to me. We need to fix this. He stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Eric, there's nothing to fix. I've already started the process with the lawyer. Her reply came almost instantly. Jennifer, please don't do this. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't throw everything away because of one stupid decision. Eric clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the phone. How could she act like he was the one throwing it all away? As if her betrayal was a mere bump in the road? Eric, you didn't just make a mistake, Jennifer. You made a choice. Over and over again. And now I'm making mine. He hit send and immediately regretted engaging at all. He didn't want to hear her excuses, her attempts to rewrite the narrative. What he wanted was clarity, to understand how their seemingly perfect life had come to this. Back at the motel, Eric opened his laptop and pulled up his email. His lawyer had already sent over the initial divorce paperwork. It was surreal, seeing his name and Jennifer's in black and white, with terms like petitioner and respondent. 6 years of marriage reduced to a sterile, legal document. He scanned the terms, noting the clause about the house. As the sole inheritor of the property, it was clear Jennifer wouldn't have any claim to it. It was a small consolation, though, considering how much of his heart was tied to that house. Every corner held a memory of their life together. Shared laughter, quiet evenings, plans for a future that now felt like a cruel joke. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Jennifer. It was Lisa, Parker's wife. Eric hesitated before answering. Hello, Eric. Her voice was tight, raw. I don't know what to say. I had no idea. Neither did I, Eric replied bitterly. Guess we were both in the dark. There was a long pause before Lisa spoke again. Do you think they're still, seeing each other? I don't know, Eric admitted. And honestly, I don't care. I'm done with both of them. Lisa exhaled sharply. I've already kicked him out. He's staying with a friend. Or so he says. I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Good, Eric said, his voice hard. He doesn't deserve you. Her voice cracked. Neither of us deserve this. The line went quiet after that, and Eric didn't try to fill the silence. They weren't friends, and he doubted they ever would be. But for a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding, a bond forged by mutual betrayal. That evening, Eric drove back to the house. He didn't want to see Jennifer, but he needed to grab a few things, a change of clothes, some work files, his grandfather's watch that he kept in the nightstand. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway, save for a single light in the living room. He hesitated before going inside, unsure if he was ready to face her again. But when he opened the door, he found Jennifer sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. Eric, she whispered, standing slowly. I didn't think you'd come back. I'm not staying, he said flatly. I just came to grab a few things. Please, she said, stepping closer. Just listen to me. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can get through this. We can fix it. There's no we anymore, Eric replied, his voice cold. You made sure of that. Her face crumpled, but he didn't let it sway him. He walked past her, heading upstairs to the bedroom. He felt her presence behind him, but he didn't turn around. In the bedroom, he gathered his things quickly, avoiding the bed they had once shared. The sight of it made his stomach turn. As he zipped his bag, Jennifer stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Do you really hate me that much?" "I don't hate you," Eric said, his voice heavy. "I just don't know who you are anymore." He slung the bag over his shoulder and walked past her without another word. As he reached the door, she called after him, her voice desperate. "Eric, wait. Please. I love you." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, he almost turned back. But then he remembered the texts, the photos, the lies, and he walked out the door. This time, he didn't look back. Eric drove aimlessly for a while after leaving the house. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that felt suffocating. His mind replayed Jennifer's words, her tears, her desperation. "I love you." The phrase echoed in his head, hollow and meaningless. If she loved him, how could she do what she did? How could she throw away everything they'd built together? He ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the same one he'd gone to that morning. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked asphalt. He sat in his truck for a while, staring at the dashboard, before finally mustering the energy to go inside. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers hunched over their coffee and an elderly waitress wiping down the counter. Eric slid into a booth by the window and ordered a black coffee. He didn't really want it, but he needed something to do with his hands, something to distract him from the storm inside his head. His phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up reluctantly, expecting another message from Jennifer. Instead, it was from his lawyer. "Lawyer, the divorce papers are ready for review. Let me know when you'd like to come by to discuss." It was a small step forward, but it felt monumental. Eric replied with a simple thanks. "I'll call you tomorrow," then set the phone down and stared out the window. The next morning, Eric woke up in his motel room to a pounding headache. The coffee he'd forced down last night had done little to quell the exhaustion that weighed on him. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw unshaven, his expression hollow. He barely recognized himself. He spent the morning at his lawyer's office, going over the terms of the divorce. The process was surprisingly efficient, thanks to the ironclad prenuptial agreement Jennifer had signed before they got married. The house, his savings, and most of their shared assets would remain his. Jennifer would walk away with little more than her personal belongings. "She's not contesting anything?" Eric asked, surprised. "Not so far," his lawyer replied. "She might be trying to avoid further embarrassment." Eric nodded, though the thought brought him little comfort. He signed the papers and left the office feeling no lighter than when he'd arrived. That evening, Eric returned to the house one last time to pack up the rest of Jennifer's things. He had texted her earlier, telling her to be out while he was there. She hadn't responded, but when he pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. Good. Inside, the house felt cold and lifeless. The decorations from her birthday party were still up, a cruel reminder of the night everything had imploded. Eric moved through the house methodically, boxing up Jennifer's clothes, books, and photos. He didn't want her here anymore, not her things, not her scent, not her ghost. As he packed, he stumbled across their wedding album tucked away in a drawer. He hesitated, his fingers brushing over the leather cover. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The first photo was of Jennifer walking down the aisle, her face radiant with joy. Eric felt a pang in his chest, a sharp, bitter ache. He flipped through the pages quickly, unable to bear the memories. When he reached the last page, he slammed the album shut and shoved it into the box with the rest of her things. Later that night, Eric sat on the couch with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the empty room. He thought about Jennifer, how she had laughed, how she had cried, how she had begged for another chance. Part of him still loved her. That was the worst part. He hated her for what she had done, but he hated himself even more for still wanting her. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it didn't dull the pain. Nothing would. He was alone now, truly alone, and he didn't know how to move forward. The life he had built, the future he had dreamed of, it was all gone. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He ignored it at first, but the buzzing persisted. With a groan, he picked it up. It was Lisa, Parker's wife. "Eric," she said when he answered, her voice strained. "I just wanted to check on you. See how you're holding up." He let out a humorless laugh. "I'm surviving." "Barely." "Same," she admitted. I don't know how to process this. How could they do this to us? I've been asking myself the same thing, Eric replied, and I still don't have an answer. There was a long pause before Lisa spoke again. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. We're both going through this, and maybe it'll help to have someone who understands. Eric hesitated, unsure if he wanted to open that door. But the truth was he was tired of being alone with his thoughts. Thanks, Lisa, he said quietly. I might take you up on that. After they hung up, Eric sat in the silence, his phone still in his hand. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of something like hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. For now. The next morning brought with it a sense of grim finality. Eric stared at the packed boxes stacked near the front door, Jennifer's things, neatly labeled and ready to be gone. He didn't want to linger on them, but each box was a reminder of what he'd lost, of the life they'd built, and the woman who'd shattered it. He had texted Jennifer early in the morning to come and collect her things. She replied quickly, saying she'd be there after work. For Eric, it was one last logistical step to endure before he could fully begin moving on. Or at least try to. That afternoon, Eric busied himself with work, taking calls and handling emails from home. His co-workers, unaware of his personal turmoil, joked and chatted as if nothing was wrong. He envied their ignorance, but also found solace in the distraction. Around 5 p.m., the sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him out of his focus. He glanced out the window and saw Jennifer stepping out of her car. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. For a fleeting moment, Eric felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly buried beneath the weight of her betrayal. He opened the door as she approached but didn't say a word. Jennifer paused at the threshold, looking at him with a mixture of regret and apprehension. Eric, she started, her voice trembling. Thank you for letting me. They're in the living room, he interrupted coldly, stepping aside to let her in. Jennifer's eyes darted toward the boxes, and she nodded silently. She moved past him, and for a moment, the familiar scent of her perfume stirred memories he didn't want to relive. He watched as she knelt by one of the boxes, carefully opening it to check its contents. I didn't throw anything out, Eric said, leaning against the doorframe. It's all there. You don't have to worry. Jennifer glanced up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. I wasn't worried about that. Eric didn't reply. He couldn't. He wasn't sure what words would even come out if he tried. As Jennifer carried the boxes to her car one by one, the silence between them grew heavier. On her last trip, she paused in the doorway, turning to face him. I know you don't want to hear it, she said, her voice breaking, but I really am sorry. I hate myself for what I did to you, to us. Eric's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. I don't care how sorry you are, Jennifer. Sorry doesn't fix this. It doesn't undo what you did. I know, she whispered. I hope one day you can forgive me. Forgive you? Eric let out a bitter laugh. Maybe, but forget? Never. And forgiving doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. We're done, Jennifer. There's no coming back from this. Tears streamed down her face, but Eric didn't feel the same ache he once might have. He was too drained, too angry. He stepped back, gripping the edge of the door. Take care of yourself, he said, his tone final. Goodbye, Jennifer. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and walked to her car. Eric closed the door before he could see her drive away. He didn't want to watch her leave again. That evening, Eric sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, staring out at the yard he had worked so hard to maintain. The garden Jennifer had loved was overgrown, the weeds overtaking the flowers. He realized he hadn't tended to it in months, too busy with work and too oblivious to the cracks forming in his marriage. He thought about Lisa's offer from the night before. She had texted him again earlier, asking if he wanted to meet for coffee. He hadn't replied yet, unsure if he was ready to talk to anyone, even someone who understood his pain. But the silence was suffocating, and deep down, he knew he couldn't navigate this alone forever. He picked up his phone and typed a short reply. Eric, coffee sounds good. Tomorrow? Her response came quickly. Lisa, tomorrow works. 11 a.m. at Bennett's? Eric, I'll see you there. He set the phone down and took another swig of beer. The weight of his grief hadn't lifted, but for the first time, He felt like he was taking a step forward. Small, hesitant, but forward nonetheless. The next morning, Eric arrived at Bennett's coffee house a few minutes early. He found a quiet table by the window and waited, his nerves buzzing. He wasn't sure what he would say to Lisa or how much he was ready to share. But when she walked in, her face a mirror of his own exhaustion, he realized they didn't need to say much at all. Their shared pain spoke volumes. "Hey," Lisa said softly as she sat across from him. "Hey," Eric replied, offering a faint smile. They ordered their coffee and sat in silence for a while, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. Finally, Lisa broke the quiet. "It's weird, isn't it?" she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Sitting here talking like this. We used to joke about neighborhood barbecues, and now we're the leftovers," Eric finished, his tone wry. She laughed softly, a sound tinged with bitterness. "Exactly." Eric leaned back in his chair, studying her. She looked tired, but there was a quiet strength in her expression. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I thought I'd be," she admitted. "Kicking Parker out helped. I don't know if I'll ever be okay, but one day at a time, right?" "Yeah," Eric said, nodding. "One day at a time." For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of connection, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this mess. As they talked, sharing stories and venting their frustrations, he felt the weight on his chest lighten just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The coffee meeting with Lisa lasted longer than Eric had anticipated. What began as small talk and awkward silences turned into a candid conversation about their shared heartbreak. By the time they left the cafe, he felt a surprising sense of relief. Not because the pain had gone away, but because for the first time, he didn't feel completely alone in it. As they walked to their cars, Lisa hesitated, her keys jingling nervously in her hand. "Do you ever feel like you should have seen it coming?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric leaned against his truck, crossing his arms. "All the time. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering what I missed. But even if there were signs, I trusted her. That's what makes it so hard." Lisa nodded, her eyes downcast. "Same. I keep thinking about how many times I told Parker I loved him, how I bent over backward to make things work. And all the while, he was—" She trailed off, but Eric knew exactly what she meant. "You didn't do anything wrong, Lisa. They're the ones who broke us, not the other way around." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that only those betrayed could truly grasp. She offered a faint smile, her voice soft. "Thanks, Eric. I needed to hear that." That night, back in his empty house, Eric found himself replaying their conversation. Lisa's vulnerability had mirrored his own, and for the first time, he didn't feel the crushing need to keep everything bottled up. He even considered calling her just to talk, but decided against it. He didn't want to complicate things, not yet anyway. Instead, he poured himself a drink and sat on the back porch, staring out at the darkened yard. The house felt quieter than ever, the silence pressing in on him. He thought about Jennifer, wondering if she was alone or if she'd already turned to Parker for comfort. The thought made his stomach churn. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Lisa. "Lisa, thanks for today. I feel a little less lost." Eric smiled faintly, typing back. "Eric, same here. You're not alone in this." She replied almost instantly. "Lisa, neither are you. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Eric that he didn't have to shoulder everything alone. He set the phone down and took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the night settle over him. The next few days passed in a blur. Eric threw himself into work, taking on extra projects and late hours to keep his mind occupied. At home, he began tackling the neglected chores that Jennifer had once overseen, cleaning out the garden, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, repainting the front porch. The physical labor gave him a sense of purpose, even if it couldn't fill the void inside him. Lisa texted him occasionally, short messages that felt like a lifeline. They didn't meet up again, but their conversations grew more frequent, each exchange a small reminder that healing was possible. One evening, as Eric was sanding down the porch railing, his phone buzzed with another message from Lisa. "Lisa, do you ever wonder if they regret it?" Eric stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Did Jennifer regret it? She'd said she was sorry, begged for forgiveness, but her words felt hollow. He finally typed back, Eric, I think they regret getting caught more than anything else. Her reply came quickly. Lisa, you're probably right. I hate that it still hurts, though. I hate that I still care. Eric leaned back against the railing, his chest tightening. He understood exactly what she meant. No matter how angry he was, part of him still loved Jennifer, the woman she used to be, or maybe the woman he'd thought she was. Eric, it'll take time. Don't be too hard on yourself. Lisa. Thanks, Eric. I don't know what I'd do without someone to talk to. Eric. Same here. That weekend, Eric decided to clear out the bedroom. Jennifer's lingering presence in the house, her perfume on the sheets, her framed photos on the dresser, was too much to bear. He packed everything into boxes, sealing away the remnants of their life together. As he worked, he found an old journal tucked away in the nightstand. It was Jennifer's, filled with notes and doodles from years past. He hesitated, then opened it to a random page. Eric doesn't know how much he means to me. I feel so lucky to have him in my life. I hope I can always make him happy. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He flipped through more pages, finding similar sentiments scattered throughout. Memories of trips they'd taken, plans they'd made, dreams they'd shared. It was like reading a love letter from a stranger. He closed the journal and set it aside, his hands trembling. He didn't know if the woman who had written those words still existed, or if she'd ever existed at all. All he knew was that she was gone, and he had to let her go. That night, Lisa called him. Her voice was quieter than usual, tinged with exhaustion. I've been thinking about what you said, she began. About them regretting getting caught. I think you're right. Does it matter? Eric asked, his tone soft. I don't know, she admitted. I guess I just wanted it to mean something. Like if they regretted it, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Eric sighed, staring at the darkened room around him. It wasn't for nothing, Lisa. It taught us who they really are, and it showed us we deserve better. There was a long silence on the other end, then a quiet, thank you, Eric. For everything. Any time, he said. We'll get through this. One day at a time. When the call ended, Eric sat in the quiet for a long time, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. A week after clearing Jennifer's things out of the house, Eric began to feel a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching his life from the outside. The days had taken on a routine: work, chores, restless nights on the couch. The bed upstairs felt like enemy territory, tainted by memories he couldn't bear to confront. Lisa's texts and occasional calls were his only reprieve from the silence. Their conversations were raw and honest, and she had become an unlikely anchor in his storm. She didn't judge him for his bitterness, and he didn't judge her for her lingering pain over Parker. They simply existed in their shared misery, offering each other the kind of understanding only the betrayed could provide. One evening, Lisa called unexpectedly. Her voice was tight, a mix of anger and exhaustion. He came by the house today, she said without preamble. Parker? Eric asked, sitting up on the couch. Yeah, he wanted to talk, to explain. She let out a bitter laugh, as if there's anything he could say that would make this okay. What did he say? Eric's chest tightened, imagining the smug expression Parker always seemed to wear. He said it was a mistake, that he was lonely. Her voice cracked, and Eric could hear the tremble of barely restrained emotion. He actually had the audacity to say he misses me. Like I'm supposed to just forget what he did. Eric clenched his fists, the anger he'd buried bubbling to the surface. What did you say? I told him to leave. Told him I didn't want to see his face again. But it still hurts, Eric. Why does it still hurt? Eric exhaled slowly, trying to steady his own emotions. Because you cared about him. Because you gave him your trust, and he threw it away. It's not something you can just turn off. Do you think they regret it? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric paused, considering his answer. Maybe, but I think they regret getting caught more than anything else. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry for what it cost them. Lisa didn't respond immediately, and Eric could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, I hate that they still have this power over us. I hate that I can't just let it go. We will, Eric said, more firmly than he felt. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we will. The next day, Eric decided to take a step toward reclaiming his space. He tackled the bedroom, stripping the bed and repainting the walls a soft gray. He bought new sheets, new pillows, even a new rug for the floor. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory, a way of taking back something that had been stolen from him. As he worked, he thought about Lisa's words. The question of regret lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Did Jennifer regret what she'd done? Or was she only sorry because she'd been caught? He didn't want to know the answer, but the question haunted him nonetheless. Later that evening, as Eric sat on the freshly made bed, his phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Lisa, do you ever wonder if you'll trust someone again? Eric stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Eric, yeah, I wonder if I even want to. Her reply came quickly. Lisa, me too. It's like if the people we love the most could betray us, how do we ever trust anyone again? Eric hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Finally, he typed, Eric, maybe trust isn't about never getting hurt. Maybe it's about deciding who's worth the risk. It felt like a hollow platitude, but Lisa's response surprised him. Lisa, maybe you're right. I guess I'm just not ready to take that risk yet. Eric, neither am I. The days turned into weeks, and Eric found himself slowly rebuilding his life. He threw himself into work, started running again, and even began tackling the garden Jennifer had left neglected. It was messy, grueling work, but there was something cathartic about it. Pulling out the weeds, pruning back the overgrowth, creating something new from the chaos. Lisa became a constant presence, her texts and calls a lifeline he hadn't realized he needed. They didn't talk about their exes as much anymore, though the pain still lingered, a quiet undercurrent in their conversations. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Eric found himself dialing Lisa's number without really thinking about it. Hey, she answered, her voice warm despite the late hour. Hey, he said, sinking onto the couch. You busy? Not really. Just trying to figure out if I can fix my fence or if I need to hire someone to do it. Why? No reason, Eric said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Just wanted to hear a friendly voice. There was a pause, and then Lisa said softly, You know I'm always here, right? If you need anything. Yeah, Eric replied, his chest tightening. I know. Thanks, Lisa. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt since the betrayal. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was hope. And for now, that was enough. The days began to blur together for Eric, but not in the numbing, aimless way they had after Jennifer's betrayal. He was finding purpose again, working longer hours at the office, running farther on his evening jogs, and tackling the yard with a determination that bordered on obsessive. The physical labor grounded him, the sweat and aching muscles offering a welcome distraction from the lingering ache in his chest. Lisa remained a constant presence in his life, her texts and calls a comfort he didn't know he needed. Their conversations had started shifting away from the betrayal that had brought them together and toward other topics, work, hobbies, even childhood memories. It felt normal, easy, a reprieve from the emotional storm that had consumed him. One afternoon, while Eric was fixing the garden fence, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on his jeans and pulled it out, smiling faintly when he saw Lisa's name. Lisa, are you free tonight? I was thinking about grabbing a drink. Could use the company. Eric hesitated, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't the first time she'd suggested meeting up again, but something about this felt different. They had been circling the idea of spending time together outside of their shared grief, but neither had quite taken the plunge. Eric, yeah, I'm free. What were you thinking? Her reply came almost instantly. Lisa, there's a quiet little bar on Main Street, O'Harris. Let's say 7? Eric, sounds good. See you then. He stared at the screen for a moment after sending the message, a knot of nervous energy coiling in his stomach. It wasn't a date, he told himself. Just two people who understood each other, sharing a drink. But as he got ready that evening, Eric found himself paying more attention to his reflection than he had in weeks. He trimmed his beard, swapped his usual flannel for a clean button-down, and even ran a comb through his hair. Not for her, he told himself. For him. O'Hara's was cozy and unassuming, with dim lighting and a soft hum of conversation. When Eric walked in, he spotted Lisa immediately. She was sitting at a corner booth, nursing a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he approached, and her face lit up with a smile that made his chest tighten. "Hey," she said, standing to give him a quick, awkward hug. "Glad you could make it." "Me too," Eric replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "How's the wine?" She lifted her glass, smirking. "Cheap but effective." He chuckled, flagging down the waitress and ordering a beer. For a while, they made small talk. Work complaints, neighborhood gossip, the usual chatter that came so easily now. But as the drinks flowed, their conversation turned deeper. "Do you ever wonder," Lisa said, swirling the last of her wine, "if we'll ever feel normal again? Like fully normal?" Eric leaned back, considering the question. "I don't know. Maybe not the same kind of normal, but maybe a new normal?" She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze distant. "It's hard, though. I keep thinking about how much time I wasted with Parker. How many years I gave him. And for what?" "You didn't waste it," Eric said firmly. "You loved him. You trusted him. That's not wasted time. That's on him, not you." Lisa's eyes softened, and she offered him a small smile. "Thanks, Eric. I needed to hear that." They lingered at the booth long after their glasses were empty, their laughter mingling with the low hum of the bar. For the first time in months, Eric felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name, something lighter, freer, and unburdened by the past. When they stepped out into the cool night air, Lisa hesitated on the sidewalk, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "This was nice," she said, her voice soft. "It's been a while since I've had a night like this." "Yeah," Eric agreed. "Me too." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, he thought she might say something more, but instead, she smiled and stepped closer. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Before he could respond, she leaned in and pressed a light, fleeting kiss to his cheek. It was over in an instant, but it left Eric standing there, stunned and warm in a way he hadn't felt in months. Lisa pulled back, her cheeks flushed. "Good night, Eric." "Good night," he managed, his voice rough. She turned and walked to her car, leaving Eric standing on the sidewalk, his thoughts a whirlwind. It wasn't a date, he reminded himself. Just two people sharing a drink. But as he watched her taillights disappear down the street, he couldn't ignore the faint flutter of hope stirring in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, the pieces of his life were starting to come together again. The drive home from O'Hara's was quiet. The hum of the engine, the only sound as Eric's mind raced. Lisa's kiss had caught him off guard. Not because it was unwelcome, but because of the emotions it stirred. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. A spark, a possibility, a flicker of warmth in the cold, hollow space Jennifer had left behind. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the house loomed like a shadowed reminder of everything he'd lost. He turned off the engine and sat there for a while, staring at the darkened windows. His thoughts shifted to Lisa, not her betrayal or Parker's, but the woman who had shared her pain with him tonight, the woman who had leaned on him as much as he'd leaned on her. Was it too soon to feel this way? Did it even matter? The next morning, Eric woke early and threw himself into his usual routine. He went for a run, tackled some overdue yard work, and tried not to think too much about the night before. But Lisa's face kept intruding on his thoughts, her laugh, her quiet strength, the way she had looked at him when she said thank you. By noon, his phone buzzed with a text. "Lisa, thanks again for last night. I had a great time." Eric smiled, his chest tightening slightly. He typed back quickly. "Eric, me too. It was nice. Really nice." The reply came instantly. "Lisa, maybe we should do it again sometime?" He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Was he ready for this? Was she ready? But the memory of her kiss pushed him forward, nudging him past his doubt. "Eric, I'd like that." The days that followed felt lighter, though Eric still carried the weight of the past. His conversations with Lisa grew more frequent, their texts flowing with an ease that surprised him. They talked about everything, work, hobbies, favorite movies, even their dreams for the future. For the first time in months, Eric felt a sense of connection that wasn't tied to heartbreak. One evening, Lisa called him out of the blue. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Hey, I was just thinking, would you want to come over for dinner this weekend? Nothing fancy, just something casual." Eric felt his heart skip. "Yeah," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'd like that." "Great," she said, her smile evident even through the phone. "Saturday at 6? I'll be there." When Saturday arrived, Eric found himself nervous in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't the same as the anxiety he'd felt before seeing Jennifer again after the betrayal. This was different, softer, quieter, but no less powerful. He arrived at Lisa's house with a bottle of wine in hand, feeling a little out of place, but determined to see where this would go. Lisa greeted him at the door, her smile warm and inviting. She was dressed casually, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for a moment, Eric forgot to speak. "Hey," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled of garlic and roasted vegetables, and Eric couldn't help but smile as he stepped inside. "Smells amazing." Lisa laughed lightly. "Don't get too excited. It's just pasta. I'm not much of a chef." They settled into an easy rhythm as they ate, the conversation flowing naturally. It wasn't until they moved to the couch with their glasses of wine that the mood shifted slightly, the air between them growing heavier. Lisa set her glass on the coffee table and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Eric said, his stomach tightening slightly. "Do you think we're rushing this?" Her voice was quiet, her eyes searching his face. "I mean, everything's still so raw." Eric hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that I like being around you, talking to you. And for the first time in a long time, I feel okay." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Me too." They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken weight of their shared history lingering in the room. Finally, Lisa shifted closer, her hand brushing against his. "I don't know where this is going," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'd like to find out, if you're okay with that." Eric met her gaze, his chest tightening. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'd like that too." The space between them dissolved as Lisa leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was tentative, almost shy, but it carried the weight of something deeper: hope, connection, the possibility of healing. When they pulled apart, Lisa smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Guess that's one way to start figuring it out." Eric laughed, the sound light and unburdened. "Yeah, I guess it is." For the first time in months, the weight of the past didn't feel so heavy. For the first time, Eric felt like he could breathe again. And for the first time, he felt like the future might hold something worth fighting for. So, what do you think about my story? Drop a comment with your thoughts on my decision and how you would have handled it.